Okay, so you know that feeling, right, when you're about to walk into like a big negotiation?
Mhm.
And it can be for anything, right? Like a job offer or even just like figuring out, who's doing dishes with your roommate.
We've all been there.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But you get that like tightness in your chest, right?
Right.
Like you want to make sure you don't get flustered
Yeah.
and that you can think clearly so you actually get what you want.
It's high stakes.
It is. So today we're diving into this idea from Mitch Jackson's book, Master the Art of Negotiation.
Okay.
It's all about the power of having a buffer, which is basically like having someone in your corner during the negotiation.
Like backup.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. And that can be a real person right there with you,
Mm-hmm.
or even just cultivating that buffer mindset that we'll talk about.
Right.
But before we get into all that, I'm curious, from your perspective, why is having a buffer so impactful in the first place?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is that it just gives you time to think. Because when you're in the heat of the moment, sometimes your brain just
Well,
goes,
it goes a mile a minute.
right, like you get that curveball thrown at you and suddenly you're just like,
Deer in the headlights.
that's exactly. And you don't want to agree to something in that moment that you'll regret later.
100%.
So having that buffer there, it's like hitting the pause button.
Okay.
So for example, let's say you're negotiating a salary for like a, I don't know, a software developer position.
Okay, yeah, something you know about.
Right, exactly. And you've done your research. You know the average salary is, say, $95,000.
Sounds about right.
But then they come back with an offer of $80,000.
Oh, that's a low ball.
Right. So instead of you having to respond right away with a counteroffer.
Which might be emotional at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your buffer can just step in and say something like, we'll need some time to review this offer and get back to you.
So it buys you some time to think.
Exactly.
It's like hitting the pause button on a pressure cooker, wouldn't you say?
100%.
Yeah. So you're not making rash decisions in the heat of the moment.
Exactly.
You can really think about what's best for you.
And that's key in any negotiation.
It is. And that ties into another thing I wanted to ask you about, which is, sometimes you don't have the luxury of having someone physically there with you during the negotiation.
Right.
So how do you create that buffer effect, even when you're on your own?
That's where mastering the buffer mindset comes in.
Okay.
It's about taking those same principles that need to pause, to think strategically,
Mm-hmm.
and applying them even when you're the one in the hot seat.
So what are some practical ways that we can actually do that?
Well, one of the most powerful things you can do is master the art of the strategic delay.
Okay, so don't feel pressured to have an answer right away,
Exactly.
even if they're like, well.
Right, because often the person who feels the most pressure to fill that silence is the one who gives up the most ground.
Oh, interesting.
So instead of just saying, I need some time to think about that, try something a little more, I don't know, strategic. Like, that's a really interesting proposal. To give it the consideration it deserves, how about we connect again tomorrow morning once I've had a chance to really look it over?
Oh, I like that. So it doesn't sound like you're just saying no. You're just giving yourself a little bit of space.
Precisely. Or let's say they throw something at you completely out of left field that you weren't expecting.
Right, that throws you off.
Exactly. Instead of having to respond right away, you can say something like, I want to make sure I understand all the implications of this. Would it be all right if we take a quick 10-minute break and I'll gather my thoughts and we can regroup?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're creating a buffer in time even though you don't have a person.
Exactly.
That's brilliant.
And then another really key part of this buffer mindset is about setting really clear boundaries.
Okay, so being upfront about expectations, that sort of thing.
Exactly. So instead of leaving things open-ended, you might say, I am available to talk about this until 1 p.m. today, but then I have another commitment, so could we pick this back up tomorrow morning?
Okay.
That way everyone's on the same page and there's no resentment.
Right. Like, why haven't you gotten back to me?
Exactly. It also prevents the negotiation from bleeding into other parts of your life, which can just add to the stress.
Absolutely.
So setting those clear boundaries is key.
Oh.
And then finally, I think a huge part of this when you're on your own is just, learning to regulate those emotions.
Oh, yeah, because you get that, like, tightness in your chest. You start sweating a little bit.
Totally. We've all been there.
Yeah.
So having some techniques for just kind of staying grounded in those moments is key.
So what are some things that you do when you feel that happening, like, in the moment?
Sometimes just physically grounding yourself can be really helpful.
Right.
Like taking a few deep breaths, feeling your feet on the floor can really just kind of bring you back to the present moment.
Oh, that's a good one. Like a reset.
Exactly. And even something as simple as naming the emotion you're feeling.
Oh,
Like, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now because this is a high-stakes situation, but I'm going to take a deep breath and approach this with a clear head.
It's like you're talking yourself off the ledge.
Exactly. And sometimes, honestly, silence can be your best friend.
Oh, interesting.
Don't be afraid to let there be a pause after they say something, even if it feels a little awkward at first.
It's like that classic negotiation tactic, right? Whoever speaks first loses.
Exactly. That silence can create a little bit of anticipation, give you a chance to observe their reaction.
Right. See if they squirm a little bit.
Exactly. And you might be surprised at what you learn by just pausing and listening.
Yeah, it's like they always say in those spy movies, never break eye contact first.
Yes.
But seriously, it sounds like what we're talking about here is really about empowering ourselves.
Right, 100%. It's about remembering that we have more control in these situations than we sometimes realize.
It's like we're not just passive bystanders in the negotiation, we're active participants.
Exactly. We have the power to shape the conversation, set the tone, even influence the outcome.
And a big part of that is having that buffer, whether it's a real person or just that mindset.
Absolutely. It gives you that space to breathe, to think strategically, to make decisions that are truly in your best interest.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for approaching negotiation now.
Me too. And it might be interesting to think back to a past negotiation, one that maybe didn't go the way you'd hoped.
Oh, like a learning experience.
Exactly. And just consider how might things have gone differently if you had had this buffer concept in your back pocket.
That's such a great question to reflect on. And for anyone listening who's ready to really dive into this, I cannot recommend Mitch Jackson's book enough.
Seriously. Master the Art of Negotiation. It's a game changer.
This whole conversation has really shifted my perspective on what's possible when it comes to negotiation, and I hope it's done the same for everyone listening.
Me too. Remember, you have the power to advocate for yourself, to create win-win situations, and to navigate even the toughest negotiations with confidence and grace.
So go out there, negotiate like you have backup even when you don't, and until next time, keep diving deep.